Hello, everybody, and welcome to this session on handling tough and critical conversations. Arunima, how are you doing?
Well,
You're looking a little sleepy, Arunima. What's up?
well, we pulled an all-nighter for this one, so
Yes, yes. This has been each one of these content sets have been so interesting and exciting to put together. I hope Arunima, you share the sentiment that I have towards it, because we've put in a lot of hard work for each one of these classes. So I hope people are liking it. From what we see, people are loving what we're doing, right? They're loving the content. We've been getting excellent feedback for the coaching session. So we feel very good. We feel very proud about what we're putting out. And I hope each one of you all who have paid and are attending this class are actually focusing on implementation. That's the most important thing for us, right? We don't care if you learn these things, if you listen to these classes, go for the coaching classes, but then don't do anything about it. That's useless. So implementation is number one. Now, for me, each and every class is exciting. I like each and every class that we do because we've only selected subjects that are important. But handling tough and critical conversations is super important as well, right? Because if you don't know how to handle tough and critical conversations, it leads sometimes to business and personal relationships getting sour, right? Very often, when you don't know how to deal with tough and critical conversation, it leads to a loss in business revenues or business. If you don't know how to deal with tough and critical conversations, very often, if you work for a large company, the customer, either the internal or external customer, then wants to speak to your boss or wants to speak to a senior stakeholder because he or she may think that you don't have the maturity to handle a tough and critical conversation if you don't know how to have it. Very often when you become a leader, right, when you have a team reporting into you, and the higher up you go in the leadership cadre, and the higher up you go in your organizational pyramid, you'll need to have more and more tough and critical conversations, right? So a lot of leaders that I meet, they often say that our entire job largely revolves around handling tough and critical conversations because we don't have any easy conversation. When problems hit the fan, or when problems really bubble up to the surface when nobody else can handle it, that's when the leaders need to step in. So for all these reasons mentioned, it's just extremely important for us to know how to have these tough and critical conversations. Arunima, you appeared on the screen much earlier than we would
very
expected,
early.
but go on. Yes.
Yes. I think another point is when you don't know how to have these conversations, it can also lead to a lot of resentment within you
Yeah.
because you are not able to perhaps communicate with your colleague or your
Yeah.
boss about something that's bothering you or something that
Yeah.
you want,
Yeah.
and then you keep it inside, and that leads to, I guess, a bit of a toxic environment as well.
Yeah. I just want to add something to what you said. When I don't think to start with. I have, or I'm as good as having tough and critical conversations as I'd like to be. Right. Of course, I'm sure I'm much better than 95% of the people around, but I know that there's huge scope and improvement in the way I have these conversations as well. And every time, the just to add to your point, every time that I have avoided a conversation like this, or delayed a conversation like this, or put it under the rug, it is genuinely led to more stress being caused in my body, right?
Correct.
And literally, I would feel it all the time that, oh, this, I need to have this conversation, I need to have this conversation, and I know I'm delaying it, possibly because I was not as equipped in terms of having these conversations earlier like I am right now. But yeah, I actually have felt what you are talking about.
Right.
Yeah, cool. So yes, handling critical conversations, very interesting topic. So what is a critical conversation? Let's try to define the subject. A critical conversation is one which centers around an uncomfortable or difficult topic. Example could be asking for a raise, giving negative or constructive feedback, letting someone go from a job, etc. Most people shy away from having critical or difficult conversations. A study from Braverly found that 70% of employees avoid difficult conversations in the workplace. I'm not surprised at all at this statistic, right? Because most human beings, like we just discussed, most human beings aren't comfortable having critical and difficult conversations. We do everything and anything to avoid such kind of conversations, right? We'd rather suffer the pain internally than have this conversation, when sometimes the answer to that pain is having the conversation, but we still don't end up having it. Facebook COO Sheryl Sandberg encourages her employees to have tough conversations at least once a week. If you're not having them, you're not growing. I agree, and especially at an organization of the size of Facebook. I'm sure there are many, many, many tough conversations that need to be had. So, extremely important, right? Now, why do we avoid critical and difficult conversations? I think we've discussed this. We are fearful that we will say something wrong. We are fearful that we'll head into confrontation or conflict. The environment will be unpleasant as a result of the critical and difficult conversation. I would really be most worried about this thing, right? The unpleasant atmosphere between me and a colleague, or me and a team member, and offend the concerned person and make things worse, and lose something of value, right? So these are some of the reasons why we don't really have these critical conversations or difficult conversations, both at home, and at the workplace. Right now, these are just a few examples of what the typical high stakes discussions at work could be. More often than not, this is going to be the biggest area of our focus during this session, because this is what we tend to do the most from a workplace point of view, is giving feedback, right? That's the most kind of high stakes conversation, the most regular conversation that we do, around performance issues, around critiquing work if some work is not good, addressing a stakeholder who doesn't meet his commitment, so on and so forth, right? So giving feedback, whether it is to your team member or subordinate, sometimes you need to, not sometimes, if you have a team reporting into you, you need to give those team members or subordinates feedback all the time, right? Number two, it could be a vendor that you're dealing with, right? So somebody who's providing you a service. Number three, you could give a colleague or a a peer or a team member. Team member is a subordinate, yeah, but a peer or a colleague, you may have to give some feedback. Somebody who's in your department or somebody who's in another department, you may have to give feedback there. You may have to give feedback to your boss or your leader on different issues, right? Again, that's something that you may have to do. And in a lot of times, you may even have to give your customer feedback on different things, right? So you're literally giving feedback to different stakeholders in your organization all the time. And that's why this is the biggest and the most regular high stakes conversation that we'll end up having. And we are going to focus the most on this thing. Besides that, we also have kind of high stakes discussions, which is about giving bad or difficult news to people, right? Which could be around a denied promotion, a pay cut, letting someone go. So that's the kind of high stakes conversation that we'd end up having. Asking for what you want, sometimes asking for a raise, requesting for a change in responsibility, asking for more resources for your department. So that's something which is again a critical, difficult, and a high stakes conversation we'll have. And very often it's about handling client escalations or customer escalations, whether they're internal or external, right? So yeah, biggest focus on this, but we're also going to cover one, two, three in addition to that, right? Briefly. Yes, Arunima.
So you've mentioned a list of stakeholders here,
Yes.
such as your
Yes.
vendor, boss, stakeholder, customer.
Yes.
Most people, I think I used to also believe this at some point. Most people assume or believe that feedback is usually something that a boss gives to a subordinate, and that's it, right?
Mhm.
Because you can't give a customer feedback, you can't really give your boss feedback. So
Mhm.
I mean, could you just bust this myth in a way to say that feedback is not only from a boss to a subordinate, but you can be giving feedback to any practically anyone?
Correct. Absolutely. I'll give you an example. I'll try to bust it through giving examples, right? So if I am dealing with a certain client at Work Better, one of our corporate clients, they would often come to me and show me a plan that they have around how they want to train probably 1,000 of their people, right? Something that they're doing
Hmm.
already. And then they'd ask me for my feedback on that, right?
Correct.
Saying, what's the feedback that you have on this plan that we've made? Sometimes they would ask me feedback on, if I was a speaker, I was conducting a workshop for them, they would come and ask me feedback on the entire batch or on certain individuals that I've
Hmm.
trained, right? So again, the whole kind of logic of giving feedback to a customer in any situation. You could be
Correct.
working with a customer on a certain project, and you could be working with possibly three stakeholders from the customer's end, and somebody's
Hmm.
behavior could deserve you
Hmm.
giving them feedback on a certain behavior that you're demonstrating that's coming in the way of you delivering great work, right? So
Hmm.
that's where you give feedback to the customer. Giving
Correct.
feedback to the boss is extremely important. Like I've mentioned, I don't think I we have a session on managing your boss in the communication coaching program, but that's a class that we've done somewhere else. But your relationship with your boss is probably the most instrumental in you making progress in your career, right? It's an extremely important relationship. And again, if you want to have good working chemistry with your
Correct.
boss, it's extremely important that you give them feedback on both their task and their behavior, so that
Hmm.
you can have a good working chemistry with them, and both of you all together can produce great results for your company and your customer, right? So again,
Correct.
giving feedback to your boss on a certain behavior or something that some ideas that he may have on a
Hmm.
certain thing, again becomes very important. Of course, the colleague and peer, when you could give a peer, somebody that's working within your department, they could come to you with something, and you may have to give them feedback on what you feel or what you think about certain work that they've produced or a certain approach that they've taken. Again, you need to give
Right.
him feedback, sometimes proactively without him asking for it, and sometimes reactively after they've asked you for it, depending on your equation with that colleague, and depending on the situation you're in. If you and your peer are working on a peer from another department are working on a project together and serving the
Hmm.
customer in some way, again you may have to give that peer feedback on certain things, right? On the
Yeah.
vendor, of course, anybody that's providing you a service, you need to give them feedback so that they can align themselves much better to the work, and align themselves much better to the expectations that you have. And of course, giving feedback to your team members is something which is some literally the job of the boss. The boss doesn't have
Yeah.
another job but to give his team members feedback at all points of time. So yeah, that's why feedback is the most important high
Correct.
stakes conversation and discussion that you'll end up having at the workplace. And giving feedback in each one of these situations is tricky. It's
Hmm.
difficult. It's not easy when you need to give feedback to someone, right? And that's why
Correct.
understanding it from its core becomes very important. And of course, if you learn from this session how to give feedback and actually do it well, it will have a direct connection on how well you perform at the workplace, right? Because in a lot of cases, like I've mentioned, in these five situations or these five stakeholders, in a lot of cases, how you give feedback has a direct correlation with the quality of work and in turn results that you produce with these stakeholders, right? So it's a direct connection sometimes which is there through it. Does that make sense, Arunima?
Yeah. So essentially, you don't have to be at a seniority level to give feedback. You can give
Yes,
feedback
yes.
at any level to whoever.
Correct. It, of course, when you have a large team, you will be giving feedback to your team all the time.
Hmm.
So when you're a team leader or at a certain seniority, you'd be doing it possibly more than when you
Correct.
don't have a team. There's no doubt about that. But in all situations, you need to learn how to do this, right, for
Yeah.
you to be effective. I'll just share one last thing. If you're good at giving feedback, even when you're dealing with your customers and clients, that becomes the real value add sometimes for your customers and your clients, right? If you give feedback in the right fashion versus just keeping quiet about something that you see. And I can tell you, at least in our clients cases, when I would give them feedback, in 8 out of 10 cases they would really appreciate the fact that I'd proactively given them feedback or my opinion on something that they were doing. And then they would look at me as an expert in that field, because I was an expert in that field. But if I didn't give my opinion to them, or if I didn't give my feedback to them on that, what's the use of being an expert if I'm not going to help them do something better, whether they're working through me or they're working through somebody else, right? So it helps so much in terms of a business setting. That is important. I don't know, that's a great question. Now, this is your time to pause and answer, ladies and gentlemen. But what are some critical or difficult conversations you've had in the past, or someone has had with you? So this is not just your past. By this we mean, what are the kind of difficult, critical conversations that you need to have possibly on a day-to-day basis, or have had in the past? How do you feel while having the conversation, right? So we have an inkling of how you feel, but how do you really feel while having these critical conversations? So pause, of course, write the example, at least 3 examples down, write how you feel about having those discussions, and of course, take these answers back to your coaching session to have a discussion with your coach on it. Okay, so now let's jump into the first topic, which is giving feedback, right? That's something that we need to sort out first. Now, what is giving feedback? Ladies and gentlemen, please pay very close attention to this section, because I can tell you it's very important for you. So, feedback is information that we provide to others about their task performance or work related behavior in order to develop the same to meet goals that are there, right? Again, let's look at this entire subject again. Okay, let me repeat this. Feedback is information that we provide, so this is one key word, to others about their task performance or work related behavior in order to help them develop the same to meet your goals and objectives. Okay, very nice definition. Now let's just break this definition down and look at it. The first key word in this definition is information, which means hard facts, concrete data, observable examples of performance and behavior, not personal hunches or assumptions. So that's the first thing that you need to do when you're giving feedback. It needs to be based on information, which is hard facts, concrete data, observable examples of performance or behavior, not just a hunch that you may have. Right? Now, the second key point is information about the performance or behavior, what the person does and how they do it, not about who they are, right? So, this essentially means you give feedback on a task or a behavior demonstrated by somebody, right? You do not make a personal attack on a person, right? You're not supposed to do that. Give the information, which is the facts, concrete observable data, performance on the task or behavior, not on the person, or not make a personal attack, right? So that's the second key point to keep in mind. Now this third and fourth are supremely important again. Okay, the third key point is that feedback has a very specific intention, that is to lead to action, right? If this does not happen, then there is no point in giving it, right? So what this means is that your attempt while giving feedback to anybody needs to be to give feedback in such a way that it leads to some action. Otherwise it's useless giving feedback, right? So for example, if I am giving feedback to Arunima on a certain piece of content that she's created, I need to give her feedback in a way that whatever feedback I give, it actually leads to her making the appropriate changes to the content, for the content that I'm giving her for the content that she's working on immediately, and also that she keeps those principles in mind when she's making future content, right? And that's what it needs to basically lead to, that action of the change immediately and change in the future content that she's making. If a certain team member of mine is coming late to work consistently, when I give them feedback, it needs to lead to an action of them where they stop coming late to work consistently, right? So that's what the feedback needs to, it needs to lead to some kind of an action, right? Now the fourth key point is the feedback is intended to affirm or develop a performance or behavior. This means that before delivering the feedback, the deliverer must be clear as to the outcome they wish to see, right? So what feedback is meant to do is, feedback is meant to develop a performance or behavior, right? That's the whole purpose of giving feedback. That if feedback is not meant to remove your frustrations on a certain thing, or feedback is not meant to just shoot your mouth or just give your opinion. No, the whole purpose of giving feedback is that the other person, whether it's on a task or a behavior that they're doing, actually ends up improving that thing so that it benefits possibly you, definitely them, and definitely the work and the company that you're working for, right? So it has that benefit. So what does that mean tomorrow? If I'm giving my boss a feedback on a certain thing, I'm giving my boss a feedback on a certain project, so that that project that we're working on, the outcome is better as a result of that feedback that I'm giving my boss on it, right? If I'm giving my boss a certain feedback on a certain behavior he possibly demonstrated towards me, I'm giving that feedback so that that behavior that he demonstrates towards me changes, so that we can work better together, which will help us meet our objectives and get our results, which will help our customers and our company, right? So at all points of time when you are giving feedback, you're giving it so that a certain task or a certain behavior develops or improves, right? That's the whole purpose of giving it. So we need to understand this thing, because we have a subsequent slide, right? So the purpose of giving feedback is to improve the situation or a person's knowledge, skills, attitude, or performance. Though feedback begins with a consideration of past and current behaviors and job performance, it doesn't end there. Useful feedback uses past actions as a springboard to help the recipient develop effective plans for future actions, right? So I think this one line, if you keep this one line in mind, it's really going to help you understand the topic of feedback much better, which is the only purpose of giving feedback is to help improve the task or the behavior of the person. So the task that the person is doing, or a certain behavior that that person is demonstrating, right? That is the only purpose of giving feedback. The purpose of giving feedback is not for you to look smart. The purpose of giving feedback is not for you to remove your frustrations. It's only to help improve or develop the other person when it comes to the task that he's doing or a behavior that is showing. And if we understand this thing, we will start giving feedback in a much better way than we do otherwise, right? And this is, in my opinion, the fundamental mistake people make while giving feedback. Now, I kept saying this thing, but you understand it better, right? Workplace feedback is given for a task performance, right? This involves the knowledge and skills, whether or not the person has capably performed assigned tasks. So you give feedback for a task performance, which is how a report or presentation has been made, how the meeting that he did was conducted, how a certain person drafted an email, if a person has, like I said, if he makes if he develops software, right, how that software has been developed. If he's a graphic designer, somebody could give feedback on the graphic design of a poster. If you're an architect, you could give your subordinate feedback on the drawings, right, that the person has made, so on and so forth, right? So you're giving feedback on a specific task that they're doing, That's one area. And the second thing is the work related behavior is what you give feedback on, right? So this is the way in which the person performs the tasks. Whether they speak politely to a customer or not. Are they showing that behavior? Whether they cooperate with team members or not, right? So that's another behavior you could give feedback on. Whether they stick to deadlines or not, whether they are punctual while doing their work. So each one of these things are work related behaviors that you give feedback on. Okay, now types of feedback, again, very interesting. um, you give two types of feedback. One is redirection, giving feedback on improvement of a performance for job related tasks, skills and behaviors. And reinforcement or appreciation, which is giving feedback to continue the performance displayed on job related tasks, skills and behaviors. Now what does this mean? A person has performed a certain task, so you could give feedback which is that this task has been done very badly, right? Everything about this task has been done very badly. So you could give the person a redirection, right? Or what is called constructive or critical feedback on the task that he's done, right? And so that's one thing that you'll do. Redirection, you sometimes it's called negative feedback, critical feedback, constructive feedback. Right now, on the other side, a person could have done a task extremely well, where you will give him a reinforcement, appreciation, right? So even when a person does something really well, your job is still to give him feedback on it, right? And again, this could be your boss, this could be your subordinate, this could be your customer, this could be your colleague, this could be your vendor. It doesn't matter who it is. If a person does something well, again, it's your job to give them feedback. So you don't just give them feedback when they do something badly, right? And in a lot of cases, a person could have done a task, and possibly three things in that big task that he's performed deserve appreciation, right? Because he's done those three things in that big task very well, and possibly two things in that task deserve a redirection, right? And more often than not, when you're involved in critical projects, difficult things, big tasks, this often takes place, right? Where you'll have to give appreciation for the same task, and there'll also be redirection. If a person is making a long 2-hour presentation on a certain issue, right? I'm assuming that not everything that he's going to do in that presentation will be good. So you'd have probably 3 points which he did really well, and one point that could have been improved in that thing, right? So here you're using both these things when it comes to one task that a person does, right? And sometimes the same thing could be true on behaviors demonstrated over a period of time, right? Now, the other thing about feedback is for you to understand is feedback is something that we give all the time. So, uh, the year end performance appraisal that your boss does with you is a form of giving feedback. And when you make a presentation in front of a client and you're done with that meeting, which is a half an hour meeting, again, your boss may give you feedback, right? So everything from a performance appraisal, which is probably a long discussion that you and your boss have, to a short meeting that you could go for, again, your boss could give you feedback for that, right? If you're in sales, and you do telesales for that matter, you could do a certain call and your boss again could give you feedback on how you can improve that call, right? So we giving feedback all the time, and we're giving feedback in varied degrees. Sometimes it's very long feedback, sometimes it's very short feedback. So again, as usual, since we're communicating with different people in different situations, there's not one standard way of doing it in all cases, right? That is not going to happen. Okay, now how to give feedback. Arunima has put together some brilliant content together. I can assure you, ladies and gentlemen, that the content that you see here is best in India for sure, but in my opinion is best in world, right? Because no kind of feedback topic is so well balanced and yet so well covered from all directions as the points that we've put down for you here, right? So these are the 6 things to remember when you're giving feedback. Give balanced feedback, make your feedback specific, keep your feedback objective in nature, give timely feedback, share the implications, consequences of the issue or the behavior, and choose your words wisely. Okay, now I want you to just observe these things. All these six things need to be done because you want to give feedback in a way that improves the task or behavior on which you're giving feedback so that it leads to action. Okay, that's how you're doing all these things so that this happens, right? It improves the task behavior and it leads to action. So you will be able to connect each one of these points to this final thing that you want to see when you're giving feedback to someone. Okay, now what does give balanced feedback mean? When giving critical feedback, be sure to include positive points too. A good strategy is to cushion constructive or negative feedback between two positive statements. This makes the feedback process feel more acceptable and less harsh to the recipient. The recipient also becomes less defensive since the process is a healthy mix of positive and constructive feedback. Okay, now I have a few points that I want to share here. Number one, it's not always possible for you to cushion constructive and negative feedback between two positive statements. That's not what I'm suggesting, that you always need to do this, right? However, where it is possible for you to do it, please do it, right? That's my point. And this really takes a change in the way you look at work and change in the way you really look at a certain task or behavior. Now, I'll give you a classic example of how a company that we were dealing with would do it wrong. Okay, so we were doing leadership workshop with area sales manager of a company that used to have a lot of mobile stores all over the country. They were one of the largest chains, right? So one of the jobs of the area sales managers used to be to visit these stores to see whether these stores have been maintained or kept in the right fashion, as in the prescribed fashion by their company, because there were just so many numbers and there were certain dictats in terms of how the store had to look, so on and so forth. So what would end up happening is these leaders would go to the stores and they would invariably find stuff that was not in place or not as per the prescribed norms, right? So as soon as they would go to the stores, they'd keep criticizing the people there, and then the people there would feel pretty demotivated. So we said, okay, now let's change this approach a little of giving feedback. The next time that you go to the store, first try to concentrate on what are all the things that they're doing right, or what are all the things that are positive, right? And what are all the things that meets the prescribed norm that you have as that mobile store, right? And then they were like, okay, yes, there are lots of things that are going right. Okay, so let's throw a little bit of light on them first. Okay, then move to the next part of what are the things that are not in place, right, as per the prescribed standard, right? Then throw a lot of light on that issue and try to end with some kind of words of encouragement of how if they do those things right, the store will come up to the mark and how everybody will benefit as a result of that, right? So try to end that with some kind of an encouragement to them. So when they would enter the store, the positive was already there. It's just that they didn't concentrate on identifying that first, then giving the negative feedback, and then ending with appreciation, right? Now the same thing happens if your subordinate is worked on a major project, right? In that major project, again, like I just mentioned, there could be lots of things that have been done well. Ensure that you mention that, then ensure that you mention the critical feedback or the things that have not been done up to the mark, right? Mention that, and then try to end with possibly words of encouragement, right? And when you do it in that fashion, it comes across as more balanced. And when it comes across as more balanced, the person on the other side is much in a better frame of mind to accept that feedback because it's balanced. Otherwise, it just seems like this person is criticizing me all the time, right? He's criticizing me for the sake of criticizing me. And then the person won't develop on the task or behavior, and it won't lead to the action that you want, right? And that's the reason why you need to adopt this approach while doing this. Now, having said this, for a certain email, for a certain project, for a certain PPT, for a certain task, if the person is done nothing well, right? If the person has done nothing well, you don't need to try to find something positive and make it fake, right? Just because you've been taught saying try find something positive. There's nothing positive about it. Please do not be dishonest. You need to be genuine, honest, and straightforward. If there's nothing good, just mention that there's nothing good in it, right? Now, so that's something that needs to be kept in mind. Feedback needs to be genuine, feedback needs to be authentic, feedback needs to be honest. At no point of time can you fake it, because that's never going to work. Okay, so that's what the balanced feedback is about, right? So Arunima has given us some lovely examples of how you could give it. So the first layer, which is the positive, let's look at this as the kind of, the critical feedback, and ending with something positive. I think you did a great job in the meeting today. I liked how confident you were throughout the presentation. However, I feel that you should have been more prepared with the past trends and done more research on the competitor's position. Doing a much more comprehensive research would have helped you tackle the Q&A better. Anyway, considering that this was your first client presentation, you did well. Keep up the confidence, right? So you're telling the person what he did well here. You're telling him here what he could have improved upon, and you're ending on a positive, which is more of kind of encouragement, right, to that person to get better. Because in the end, you want the person to develop or improve the task, the behavior, okay, and you want it to lead to action. That's what you want to do, right? This is your end thing of what you're trying to achieve through this thing. Yes, Arunima Kamat.
We had discussed this briefly, I believe, in one of our other classes. But for people who are not attending that, and I thought I'll ask you again here,
Yes.
when you sort of end, let's say, with a positive statement, or you cushion the negative or the critical statement between two positive, is there a possibility then that lessens the impact and your message may get lost, or the person may not really may miss out on actually the criticality of your feedback statement, because they're, you've given it with the positives around it. So I know it's not really sugarcoating, but again, could it possibly be that you might end up doing that in with your message?
Correct. Excellent question, Arunima. So first of all, it's almost impossible to predict how 7 billion people on the planet will react to a certain thing, right?
Yeah.
But by and large, if you are honest and authentic about giving the feedback, which means, let's just
Mm-hmm.
take this situation.
Yeah.
Let's assume that this gentleman making this presentation was not confident at all,
Hmm.
right, and overall had not done a good job with the presentation, and you
Hmm.
start by saying, oh, you did a great job with the presentation. Now you're
Understood.
being
Hmm.
dishonest here, right? And the minute you're
Hmm.
being dishonest here, your subordinate is not really going to trust you on anything that you say, right? So what is sugar coating? Sugar coating is when, in a way, you're trying to be dishonest about a certain thing, and you're just marrowing muska for the sake of marrowing muska. You're
Hmm. Hmm.
That's what you're trying to do. You're just sugarcoating for the sake of sugarcoating, which I'm not recommending at all. All that I'm
Correct.
saying, if a person has genuinely done something well, please start with that, because exactly like the mobile
Correct.
store example that I gave you, there were genuinely a lot of things that they were doing well, where the focus never
Correct.
came on, and they were just picking on probably three or four really small things that
Hmm.
were there. And they could have definitely started by saying that, listen, you guys are doing a fantastic job on all these issues, but these are three issues that are very serious that you still need to do a good job on, right? That is what
Correct.
balance really means. But if there's nothing
Hmm.
positive, please don't
Don't
mention
mention it.
anything positive,
Got it.
right, about it. It's a good question, Arunima. Okay, another example of giving balanced feedback. Layer one, I understand that there was a family emergency because of which you could not prepare well for the meeting. Layer two, however, it is important that you understand the lack of preparation can result in the client forming a poor impression of you and thereby the organization. I'd like you to be thoroughly prepared for every meeting, exactly like you usually are, right? Now, again, this is a way of giving balanced feedback where I'm assuming there was a genuine family emergency. So you've started with something positive, which is empathy here, right? You, in a way, empathized for the person's situation. Then you've given your constructive feedback of what you want to say to the person, right? And then you of course ended off with some certain positive, saying that, listen, I know that you are usually prepared for this thing, but ensure that you continue your usual trend, and I know that this is an aberration on that, right? So that's an example of again balanced feedback. Now, um, this is what you need to do. Pause your video here and give 3 examples of balanced feedback you'd give to a stakeholder at the workplace, right? So exactly like we showed you 2 examples, you show us 2 examples of how you can use balanced feedback, where you start with something positive, then you give in a way the negative or constructive feedback, and then you end with something which is positive again. Give any 3 examples of this thing. Pause it, write those answers down here, and take them to your coach and have a discussion with him or her. Okay, now the second point, make it specific. I think when it comes to effective communication, make it specific is more or less the golden rule when it comes to anything, right? Because in a way, all good communication is specific communication, precise communication, specific yet concise. The more specific your feedback is, the clearer it will be for the person to understand exactly what improvement the task or behavior requires. Vague feedback will only cause confusion. Okay, now I'm going to give you one tip that if you're a team leader and has you have subordinates reporting into you, this is what you should ideally do while giving feedback, right? Which is in a way a coaching style of giving feedback. Let's assume you and your subordinate have gone for a client meeting, and your subordinate has made that presentation that we just saw to the client. At the end of that presentation, say when you're in the taxi on your way home, the way to give feedback is to first ask the subordinate, so how did you think you did in the presentation, right? What are the things that you think you did right? What are the things that you think you could improve upon? So first, instead of you giving the subordinate feedback, pose this question to the subordinate in terms of what could he do well, how did he what could he what do you think he could have improved on, right? And let the points first come from them, and after the person has come up with his own points, then you can add your own points to that. Because very often you will realize that the person himself or herself will know what are the things that they did well and what are the things that they didn't do well, right? They would know them themselves, and them verbalizing that instead of you verbalizing that is much better, because then the bind towards the development will be much more, because those points have come in from them. And then you could, as a leader, add a few points to that. Or if there are certain things that they've missed, both in terms of what they've done well and in terms of what they've not done well, then your job in a way is to add points to both those areas, right? But first give them a chance to explain themselves on a certain thing. Right now, the same thing will hold true if one of your subordinates consistently comes late to office, right? So the first thing to do before you go and in a way jump and pounce on him is you can tell him that, hey, you know what, I've observed that you've been coming late consistently. I've looked at your record over the past 30 days, and you've come late at least on 10 occasions to office on those 30 days. So I want to have a discussion with you on that. And you can start by always asking the person, so what is happening? Why is it that you're coming late? Because you worked here for a year, and for this entire year you've relatively, for all these months, you've always been coming on time. So what is the actual reason behind you coming late? And give that person a chance to explain, right? Then after he explains why it is, then you can ask him itself, so now what needs to be done? What do you think you need to do to ensure that you start coming on time, right? Because you coming late so many days leaves a very bad impression to the rest of your colleagues. It leaves a very bad impression for your subordinates. It leaves a very bad impression for your customers as well, when you're late and they're waiting for you. So now how can you go about fixing it? What are the things that you can do? And then again, let it come from him, and then you can give your input to top that off, right? So the when it comes to giving feedback to your subordinates, to your team members, to people reporting into you, this is the best way to do it, which is a coaching style of giving feedback, where you don't jump into giving feedback. You kind of elicit, or you get the points out from them, And again, it leads to the same thing. Why are you doing this? Because when the points come out of your subordinate, it is likely to lead to action. It is likely, when he comes up with his own points, he's likely to act upon them and develop his behavior in accordance to what the person said. Right, so that's the way you do it. It may not be possible in most other cases when you're giving feedback, but definitely possible in while dealing with your subordinates. Now, what is examples of of specific feedback? Again, these are very nice examples that Arunima has put together. Unspecific, I think you should have spoken in a better way on the call. Right, specific, I feel, you could say, I think that you should have spoken in a better way on the call. I feel like you should have focused on being more polite over the call. That would have made you sound more professional. Right, so this is an unspecific way, the same thing in a specific way. um, Again, like I said, if I'm a leader, the first thing that I would do is I would make the person analyze, saying, okay, you know what, you just did a 1 hour call with the customer. I want you to analyze what are all the things that you did well on the call, what are all the things that you could have improved on the call. Right, so let him come up with his list first. Then if he misses out on this point of, he could have been more polite over the call, that's the time that you add that, because very often the person could himself come up with so many points that you haven't thought of yourself, and that would have been even better. Right, because now two brains are giving that one person feedback, and it's not just your brain giving the person feedback. Right, now, so unspecific, you dealt with the client well. Specific, I really appreciate how well you stuck to the commitments that you made to the client in spite of having to work on three other deadlines. Right, so again, a very specific thing that you're appreciating on. Unspecific, this presentation hasn't been made well. Specific, you could say, though I appreciate the effort that you've put into this presentation, it still has a room for improvement, a scope for improvement. You need to represent the trends through graphs to make it readable, use customer animation, use pictures. So these 3 points can be mentioned. Right, now, you need to be, as a communicator, you need to be careful about literally every word that comes out of your mouth. Right, that's what good communicators do. They're very careful about language, they're very careful about how they speak. Now let's just look at this one line. Though I appreciate the effort that you've put in for this presentation, if you're a leader, please don't say this unless you know that the person has actually taken a lot of effort to do this. The person's worked day and night and got something wrong. Then you can start by saying that I appreciate all the effort that you've put into doing this. But never be in a situation where you're just using that line loosely. Right? The same thing could be done if a vendor is making a presentation to you on something and you know that they've really worked very hard, but the results are not up to the mark. You can appreciate them for saying, listen, I see, and I know that you'll have put in a lot of effort around this presentation. However, these are all the points that I think need improvement in what you've done. Right, but if you know that they've done a shoddy job and they've not put in the effort, please do not say that line. Right, because like we mentioned, feedback needs to revolve around authenticity, being genuine, not faking stuff, and not just saying stuff for the sake of it. Right, so keep that in mind. Now, exactly like the examples behind on the previous slide, pause here and state 3 examples of unspecific feedback you've given to a stakeholder at your workplace. Right, and make that same thing specific. So follow the exact model of writing something typically that you'd say in an unspecific way where you give feedback, and the same thing how you do in a specific way. And of course, carry all these answers to your lovely, competent coaches who will help you out in getting more clarity in this. Okay, now keep your feedback objective. Now, this is something that we discussed earlier. Address the behavior task, not the person. Do not make personal attacks. Right, now, why shouldn't you make personal attacks? Because if you make personal attacks on a person, the person is busy getting offended on the personal attack that you made and is not really concentrating on the feedback that you're giving. Why do people typically make personal attacks? They make personal attacks because they lose their cool in that particular situation, and they're more often than not removing their frustrations than working on giving feedback that will lead to action and that will improve the task or behavior. Right, so making personal attacks never or rarely helps. Okay, I'll give you an example which is it's a really minute kind of use of words, but it makes such a big difference. You could say you're a stupid person, right? Is a personal attack on a person, right? But if person has done, one of your subordinates, one of your colleagues has done something absolutely ridiculous in nature, right? You could say that this particular behavior that you demonstrated was stupid, right? So you're not saying you're a stupid person and attacking the person. You're saying, listen, this particular behavior that you did was absolutely out of line, was absolutely stupid and not well thought through, right? So you could put something across like this, but you can't make a personal attack on a person, because then he's saying, Are, पूरा stupid थोड़े हूं मैं, right? I'm not stupid when it comes to everything, and he's busy thinking about that than when you make it specifically about that behavior, right? Stick to facts and cite concrete examples when you're giving feedback. Focus on things that the person can change. Which, what does this mean? You need to, as a person, be very aware of what are things that a person can change and what are the things that a person can't change. So if you're going to say, boss, I need your English improved by next week, right? If you are a leader saying something like that, you're stupid if you're saying that I need your English improved by next week, because that takes a very long time. Even when a person puts an effort every day, which most people are not willing to do, by the way. I wonder how many of y'all are doing your communication gym, which is very, very important if you want to improve the way you articulate, speak. I hope you're doing that. But anyway, so if you say that, oh, I want your English improved by next week, that's ridiculous, right? But you can give a person feedback of saying that, okay, you know what, I want you to learn one small area of the English language, right? And I want you to start improving on this. And over the next 2 weeks, I need to see that that bit is totally improved in the way you're speaking on calls to the customer. You're not making that particular mistake that you're making as far as your English grammar is concerned, right? So focus on things that the person can actually change while giving feedback. Okay. Now, examples of citing examples. Okay, that's a good one. You you need to reduce attending personal calls and time spent over social media, right? So very often, if you just say that, that's not going to be enough for you while giving feedback, right? You are going to have to cite to the person examples to make your point clear to them, that this is some behaviors that I have observed myself, and these are examples of that, right? Now, yesterday our client Mr. Mehta got upset as he had to wait for 10 minutes while you were on a personal call. Last Wednesday, while Kavita was presenting the review, you were busy checking your Facebook updates. On Monday, during the sales meeting, I noticed that you were texting throughout, right? So now this is feedback where a person is consistently over the week demonstrated certain behaviors. Ideally, you should have given him feedback right away. That's the best way to do it, which is timely. So the minute, for example, this last Wednesday meeting happened, you should have gone and like called the person and given this feedback. But very often we don't do that because he's probably done that just once, right? And you haven't noticed him doing it all the time. But then over the week, you saw that he's done it just so many times, and it's not just a one-off occurrence that is there, right? So then you could kind of call him in and share your feedback to him, and tell him about all the examples that are there, and that will make you're giving feedback more robust to him. It won't just feel like you're just making up stuff from the top of your head when you have those observable examples. Right now, when you tell the person that, Mr. You were, while presenting the review, you were seen checking your Facebook updates, right? The person says, no, I wasn't checking my Facebook updates. Now don't get into an argument with him. If you know for sure that the person was checking the Facebook updates and the person says, no, 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 I wasn't, you don't want to be bickering with him on that, right? You don't want to, in a way, strip him of his dignity when he's defending himself. You can say, listen, I was sitting in this position, I have seen this thing, I don't want to really get into a debate for this. For me, what's important is that during meetings, during these situations, that you don't be busy on social media, don't be busy on personal call, because this is the consequence that happens of that behavior that you demonstrate, and this is not something that we would like, right? So that's the way you can go about handling it. Now let's look at example 2. I really appreciate your ability to go the extra mile to service customers, which has resulted into good business. And then you can cite examples, which you can pause and read here. each one of these things. Last month, Mr. Shenoy opened 6 Imperia accounts with us, and he personally came to tell us about the exceptional service that you've been providing him by going out of your way each time. Last week, I observed that you personally went to Mr. Nayak's house to deliver the FD receipt. He has opened 4 RD accounts with us since then. And this morning, I know that you loaded with work since you returned from leave, yet you still managed to help Mrs. Ayer with her swallowed debit card. This has led to her son transferring their current account to our bank, right? So clearly we work with a lot of banks all across India, so this is a good banking example. So even when you're giving, in a way, negative feedback or critical feedback, as in this case you're still citing examples. Even when you're appreciating the person or giving reinforcement to a person, you are still giving him examples, right? For it to sink in. When you give examples like this, both when it comes to reinforcing or constructive feedback, it also shows the person that you're giving feedback to that you have actually been observant of their behavior, or that you're carefully observing the task that they're doing and not just speaking from the top of your head, right? So people tend to take that feedback a lot more seriously than otherwise. Okay. Personal of a example of a personal attack: you process the wrong amount to the vendor. How can you be so dumb, right? This is no way of giving feedback. This is absolutely insulting. Now, better way of giving feedback: an incorrect amount was deposited in the vendor's account, which led to him becoming irate yesterday. Ensure that you double check all entries and are extremely careful about processing vendor amounts here on. Errors like this could lead to negative consequences for the business and thereby spoil our relationships with the vendors, right? Now, one of the reasons why people like giving feedback like this, if you look at this, this is much shorter, no? One line. Here, if you have to give feedback in the proper way, you need to take more effort, you need to put more thought into it, you need to select the right words, you need to do all those things if you have to give feedback in a proper fashion, right? Look at this thing, just the use of words which we have later: wrong amount versus incorrect. Like, this is a small thing in language, but it helps so much in reducing the blow sometimes for the person that you're giving feedback to, right? So this is a slightly better way of giving feedback. And again, I've mentioned it at the start, it doesn't mean that you need to do this all the time. Like, for example, if this person repeats this same mistake again and again and again, right? Then you need to keep getting more firm and firm, right? In the way you go about giving that feedback, right? So then you're not going to cushion it with some positive. You're going to be really firm and assertive while giving that feedback to him, and he'll go up the chain. But however assertive you get with that person, you cannot be making personal attacks and saying you're dumb, you're this. That's no way of giving feedback to a person, right? And then if need be, take the action that you're required on that person, but still don't make personal attacks. Okay. Now, another example of a personal attack is, I had asked you to call the client yesterday to give him a status on processing of his housing loan, which you have forgotten. The client is angry at me. You are irresponsible. You're an irresponsible person. Better way: you were supposed to call the clients yesterday to give him the status on the processing of his house loan. You need to ensure that you don't forget these tasks, as it reflects carelessness on your part, right? So that's the way you could, it's a better way of giving feedback without making a personal attack. Okay. Now, your exercise: state 2 examples of feedback that you've given to stakeholders. Further explain this to the recipient by substantiating with examples, right? So think of 2 ways in which you've done it. So examples, by the way, it's also, if you saw what you did while giving specific communication and giving examples are very close to each other. So in that presentation example, when you saw, you gave him 3 examples of what he did well and didn't do well in that thing, right? So specific and examples are very close to each other, um, as concepts. Now, state 2 examples of feedback that you've given to a stakeholder which seemed like a personal attack. restate these as feedback on the person's behavior and not the person themselves, right? Now this personal attack rule also applies in our personal life so often, right? That we tend to give feedback to people on our personal lives also in the form of personal in terms of attacks that we make on them, instead of just concentrating on the task or behavior at hand, right? So pause the video here, write these answers, and take them to your coach when you speak to them. Okay, now the fourth point is give feedback immediately. Give feedback immediately or as close as possible to the time of the event in question actually occurred, right? The event would be fresh in everyone's mind, and responding to a situation quickly shows that you believe that it is important to be addressed. Okay, now, why should you give feedback as close to the event as possible? By and large, it's fresh in the person's mind. So when you give feedback on something which is fresh in a person's mind, it is more likely to improve their task or behavior because it's fresh in their mind. It's more likely to lead to action, right? So everything that you do in feedback revolves around these two things. The reason why you give feedback in all these ways is so that these two things happen, right? Now if a person has done something today and you give him feedback 3 months down the line, the person is going to barely remember what happened 3 months back, right? So the chances of it actually improving the task or behavior, or the action actually taking place, is very low. So do it as close as possible to a certain the incident happening or you observing a certain thing. Now there are a few exceptions to this, right? What are the exceptions? Let's look at a situation where the your subordinate is just had a heated discussion with a customer, and your subordinate is in therefore is in not a very good mood, right? Around a certain thing, and then you give him feedback. Now when you give him feedback when his mood is not right, he's unlikely to digest that feedback, he's unlikely to accept that feedback. He's much more likely to be defensive around that entire thing than accept it. So at that point of time, when the mood or his state of mind is not right, you may want to delay that feedback a little bit, right? That's one. Number two reason why you may want to delay something is like the previous example that we saw, right? You could be in a meeting and you observe that one of your subordinates during a client meeting is on social media, or is fooling around on his phone while an important meeting is happening, and maybe he just did it for 5 minutes, right? But you could say that, okay, maybe something really important came up and he was having a look at it, so you could give him the benefit of doubt and not necessarily give him feedback on that unless it's something which was really bad in that case. But then through that week, through a couple of weeks, you observe these things happening again and again. That's when you may want to give him, call him and give him feedback on his social media practices while important client discussions or meetings that are happening. You may want to call him in and giving discussion on that, right? Now let's look at a situation where during this meeting, the person, throughout a 45-minute meeting, the person was busy browsing on his phone on Instagram for 30 minutes, right? Then you may not want to wait an entire week. Then as soon as that meeting is over, you want to go and give him feedback on that thing if you observed something that was really out of place, in a way, right? So those are the only two cases where you may want to delay the feedback. Okay, so here are examples. Hi Om, if you are free now, I wanted to discuss the client meeting you did last September. Okay, versus hi Om, if now is a good time, I wanted to give you my inputs on your meeting with XYZ yesterday. Okay, so this is about timely feedback. Now this is again an important point. Share the implications or consequences of the issue. Now, this means explaining the consequences of the behavior on your team, organization, or client. Alternatively, you could also show how the constructive feedback is beneficial to the recipient. Create a what's in it for me, which means what's in it for them, by showing how the change will result in something positive. This will serve as an excellent this will serve as an excellent motivate. Okay, we made a mistake there. Motivation for the recipient to introspect and improve his or her behavior. right? So that's what will end up happening. um, yeah, so let's just take the previous example. If a person has been on browsing social media through an important client meeting, you need to tell him that, hey, you know what, I wanted to give you some feedback on your conduct during the meeting that we just had with this important client. And the first and the most important thing that I observed about your conduct during the meeting is that during a 1 hour meeting you spent close to 30 minutes on your phone, not participating in the discussion, not making eye contact with the customer, and browsing on what seemed like some social media because I was sitting 2 chairs away from you. So you were browsing on social media while that was happening. Um, right now, what are the implications or consequences of that action? When you are on your phone during a client meeting for almost half the client meeting, it gives the customer an impression that you are not fully there, that you're not fully interested in that meeting, that you aren't fully committed to the meeting, that you don't really want to solve this problem. So that's the kind of impression that the customer will end up getting. And you know how finicky this customer is and how important this customer is to us. And we've lost projects with him on much smaller things than us not being interested in the meeting. So it could also lead to us potentially losing this business from us, that could have bad consequences for our department and our company in turn, right? So you may think that a small action like that doesn't resonate with a small action like that is not going to be picked up by the customer, but this customer will definitely pick that action come, and so will most of our other customers, right? So you've told him about it, but you've told him also about the implications, the immediate implication and the probably long term implications that were there. If you're talking about it from a what is in it for me, or what implications will be from me, so the same example, you could say that, because of this act of yours of seeming not interested in the meeting, there's every chance that the customer could come and tell me that they don't want somebody like you on the project, and they want somebody else that they've been worked with previously on the project. And if you keep losing projects like this, it can have a very bad impact on your career, and it'll really impact your year end appraisal in some way, right? If you continue this behavior, and you won't have the progress that you need to have. So that's kind of explaining it from the implications of that action and what is in it for me, right? Let's look at the examples given here. Sahil, you need to meet your timelines and commitments. Inability to do so impacts the brand's image and credibility. Also, every time you don't honor your words, it damages your relationship with the client. Okay. So this is the part, right? Inability to do so impacts the brand's image and credibility. Okay, and this is the other implication that that action has. Ria, you need to ensure that your tea breaks are restricted to 10 to 15 minutes. The 30-minute tea breaks that you take has now led to your subordinates doing the same thing. This will eventually lead to your team underperforming and reflect poorly on you as a supervisor, right? So this is again the implication of the behavior. You have taken a leave 4 times this week without informing me. This has led to other team members working overtime to share the workload. Also, this is creating discontent among the, again, this is the implication of the person's action. So you have shown extreme efficiency in following up consistently with this client. This has resulted in fetching us this key account. Right now, this is again implication from a positive point of view. So like we said, all feedback in certain things could be in sometimes all negative, all positive, and sometimes it'll be a mix of positive and negative, right? So in this case, you're giving feedback to a person, and really and it makes so much of a difference, right, when you give positive reinforcement, including the implications of it. So important. Now, in a situation where a person is done well, right, and you're giving them kind of positive feedback or appreciation, you can say that, hey, the way that you have worked on this particular account has been excellent. You have done one, two, three, four, five things extremely well while dealing with this customer. Now, this has led to the customer giving us 2 additional projects. The good work that you've done has led to customers giving us 2 additional projects, and we've also got one reference as a result of it, right, through the word of mouth that the customers get, and that is in turn led to bigger revenue being generated by our cohort or our team, which is going to benefit me as a team leader, you, and possibly everybody else on the team as well, right? So a great job done on every parameter. So look at the way you've given feedback. You've told him you've done a good job with the client. You mentioned all the specific things that he's done well, possibly given examples while doing that, and then you've told him the implication that is had in terms of getting more business, getting more reference, and in turn more revenue that benefits everyone, right? So that's a beautiful way of even giving positive feedback to somebody. So we've essentially shown you both sides of this. Now, state two examples of feedback that you've given to a stakeholder. Further explain to the recipient the consequences of the impact or the consequences of the behavior that you demonstrate. Now, my suggestion to you is give two examples from a workplace, and if you have the time and patience, and if you have children especially, possibly give two examples of how you could give your child a feedback on something that you're doing while telling them the consequences of that behavior that they've demonstrated, right? Yeah, and by the way, we mentioned behavior here, but it could be about a task as well, right? So it doesn't just have to be about a behavior. So ever so often what tends to happen is, if a person has done a report brilliantly, you could give him feedback on the report by saying, these are all the things that you've done very well in your report. Now, you giving this report has led to our client, from my conversation with them, been extremely happy. This has shown us to be very professional in the eyes of the client, and this will definitely lead to more business coming in from the client in the future, right? So this is the consequences of you sending a great, well-made report to them, right? So you can also do it in that case. Now, this is a big one. This is a very interesting one, right? The sixth and the last point, but it has many sub points, is choose your words carefully, starting with your tone of voice. And let me explain each one of these points with you, right? Yeah. So while giving feedback, in my opinion, your tone of voice is the single most important thing that you need to get right while giving feedback. And your tone of voice needs to be assertive while giving feedback, which is, like we said, assertive is a polite plus firm or confident tone of voice, right? That's what assertive means. Your tone of voice. Now, sometimes, depending on how and what you're giving feedback about, sometimes it could lean a little more in onto the politeness. Sometimes, if the person is still not taking you seriously, or you need to give the feedback repeatedly about the same thing, it could lean more into being firm with the person, right? So sometimes it will lean more this side, sometimes it will lean more this side, but at all points of time, however firm you're being with somebody, it still needs to have a tinge of politeness to it. However polite you're being to somebody, it still needs to have a tinge of being firm. And this is the key thing to remember while giving feedback, right? Which makes it very interesting. But through the day, there are constant exchanges of feedback with your stakeholders. It's not possible for you to cushion your feedback every time. However, you do need to have the right tone of voice each time. Your tone always needs to be firm yet polite, right? That's what you need to keep in mind. And the minute you get your tone wrong, every other thing that you'll do will be a total waste, right? I'll just give you an example. Arey, ye kya kar raha hai yaar tu? What the hell are you doing in terms of this thing, right? Now, the minute you speak in what I showed you was an irritated tone of voice, right? Irrespective of what you say, then the person is going to just focus on that irritated tone of voice. If you speak in an angry tone of voice to somebody, they're just going to focus on this angry emotion which is there, or this irritated emotion, and they're not going to take what you're saying that seriously, right? It's not really going to be absorbed or digested well by them, and you need them to digest that thing well. Why? So that it develops the task or behavior, it improves the task or behavior immediately and in the long run, and that it leads to action. So that's why you want it to be digested and not just you kind of removing your frustrations. Okay. In If you want to be a successful professional and even have a peaceful life, in my opinion, the one thing that you need to have is you need to have the ability to regulate your emotions, because tone of voice is nothing but emotions or feelings expressed through words. tone of voice typically reflects your emotion on a certain issue. And if you cannot regulate your emotions, it's very unlikely that you're going to be able to give great feedback to somebody, right? So each one of us needs to really learn how to regulate our emotions, and we need to take great pride in our ability to regulate our emotions, and not when we lose our cool on a certain thing. We must be embarrassed when we lose our cool. You may get really firm with somebody, but it shouldn't be from a space of losing your cool. It should be from a space of calculation, from a space of knowing that, okay, in order for me to for this person to take what I'm saying seriously, I need to be really firm from about it. You could be really irritated about something that has happened, but yet you can't start speaking to people in a frustrated, angry, irritated way, because that doesn't help more often than not. You could often speak to them where you're frustrated and irritated about something. That's okay. But you can't be losing your cool while doing that, right? You need to keep your tone of voice in the zone of being assertive, which is polite yet firm, right? Keep that in mind while delivering your feedback. I think it's the most important thing while doing it. Don't use a sarcastic tone. Like I mentioned, even when you're using an irritated tone, it must be irritated yet, polite and firm. But you could have spaces where you get irritated while giving feedback if somebody is really screwed up on something in a big way. Okay. Yes. The second point, use I messages instead of you messages. Okay. What does this mean? Using you too much can make it seem like you're blaming the person. This can make them feel victimized and defensive. Using I feel or I think shifts the focus from the other person and puts the ownership of the feedback on you. Okay. Example, feedback statement: you need to improve your English. Most NRI customers don't understand you or what you say. You should do something about it, right? So this is where you're using a lot of you statements. Good English, and a better way of putting that same thing across: good English is one of the key components for successful interaction and building good relationships with our NRI customers. I think this may be an area of challenge you are currently facing. Do you want to discuss possible options of how you can overcome this thing, right? So this is a better way in which you can give feedback. Now, if you looked at this case, you've done it in the coaching style of giving feedback, right? You say this is very important, I think that you should improve it. What are the measures you think that you can take towards it? Come on, come up with some option. And the person will come up saying, I can do this, I can do this. And then you can add your two bits to that. But that's a much better way of giving feedback than using you everywhere. Instead of you, say, I think or I feel is a much better way of doing. And this comes to anything. Arunima, are you here?
Yes, I am.
Yeah, we had shared another example of I think I feel versus using you. Anything comes to your mind immediately that we can share with our audience?
Hmm. I'll just give me a few moments. I'll think of it and then
Okay,
I'll
cool.
I'll come back. Yeah.
Yes. Okay. Now, give an example of feedback to a stakeholder. Restate it with a shift in focus using I messages instead of you, right? Just we've discussed this point earlier as well, in terms of the minute you start using too many you statements, it seems like you're making a personal attack on somebody at some point of time, right? So, okay, you have not done this project right, versus saying I feel you could do this project better, right? So that's what I feel versus you is. And like the next example, you always come late, right? So you don't want to use always, which I think we have that example later, but try to avoid the you language and use the language which is I feel, I think, in most of these situations, right? So yeah, pause and at least try to come up with one example here of how you can shift you to I messages. Okay, now this,
Swapnil, I came up with an
okay,
example.
yeah, tell me.
Perhaps instead of saying that you speak rudely to customers, or
Yeah,
you don't. Yeah, I think let's take that example. That you are very rude when you speak to customers, and a way of saying that would be, I feel
yeah,
that you come across as
yeah,
unprofessional slash whatever trait you want to highlight. So again, instead of directly starting with you
Yeah.
do this,
Yeah.
I say that, what, I think that you've been doing this, and my recommendation would be to sort of
Yeah.
correct
Yeah.
it in this manner.
That that's an excellent example, right? While doing it, and again, like I keep saying, that most of these principles that we've discussed also apply in your personal life, right?
Yeah.
So using, again, I think, I feel, while giving somebody feedback personally makes it less, it makes it seem less like an attack, and more something which is the focus on you versus them, and that really helps a lot, right? Now, don't generalize by using words like always, never. Again, this is a big point of how to use your language while giving feedback. Tu hamesha late aata hai, you're always coming late. You never do these things on time. Right now, the minute you start speaking that language of saying you always come late, what happens in the receiver's end is he's thinking, I don't always come late. I 10 days a month I came on time. This I may have come late on the other 10 days, but 10 days at least I came on time, right? So when you use that always, the person gets into defensive mode, and we do this in our personal life so much, especially with our spouses, right? We do it the most with them, where we keep, you always do this thing, and then he says, always, I don't always do this thing, right? And that makes so much of a difference in terms of how they receive the feedback in the end. And it makes it, the minute the person on the other side, their emotional state is aggrieved by by the word always, they're not accepting your feedback anymore, right? They're busy defending themselves. Where will the action happen? Where will change in behavior happen, right? So instead of that way, a better way is to come up with the facts and to make it specific and to give examples, right? In the past 2 months, you've been over an hour late for 7 to 8 times. This has resulted in customers waiting for you and eventually getting irate. This reflects poorly on us. Please ensure that you come on time henceforth, right? So now you've not said always, you've actually seen the data, and you actually given that person data in terms of how often he's come late, and that's a better way of dealing with it, right? You never finish the task assigned to you on time, right? So the minute you say you never finish the tasks that assigned to you on time, the person is thinking, never? Oh, I've given so many tasks on time, right? Why is this guy saying never? I've just not done it this few times. Again, the person gets into defensive. The last two assignments that you have completed as per haven't been completed as per the set deadline. When you don't stick to the deadlines, it has a negative impact on the team. This leads in a delay of the whole process, and the entire team has to work till late, right? So this is a much better way of giving it. So never use always, never. It doesn't work. Okay, now give an example of generalized feedback to a stakeholder where you use always and never, and now try to do the same thing, restate it in better words like you've just seen here. And of course, pause it here, do this exercise, and then take this to your coach to have a discussion with him on this. Okay, now use positive words. Again, this is not always possible. You always can't be so careful about the words that you use, but this is just us throwing some ideas in your head. Depending on the situation, depending on who you're speaking to, ensure that you're using positive words. If you're giving feedback to your boss, if you're giving feedback to a peer, if you're giving feedback to a customer, doing these things that are being mentioned here, are using positive words, is a very tactful way of doing it, and sometimes it could be called a diplomatic way of doing it. And diplomatic is a nice way of doing stuff, by the way, huh? The diplomats use very good language then when they're speaking to other stakeholders, right? They know how to be tactful, which is they know what to say, who to say it to, and how to say it. They know all these things. So this slide is especially important for you while talking to your bosses, peers, customers. Okay, statement one: don't use jargons with customers. Instead of saying don't use, you can say, I feel you could avoid using jargons with customers as they may not understand them, right? So you added the I feel part. I feel you could avoid using jargons with customers as they may not understand them, right? Can you imagine how good this language is? Even when you're speaking to a boss, even if you have to give feedback in a meeting to important stakeholders, that could be your seniors, and they ask you, what is your opinion? You can't say I don't feel you did this correctly. You can say in my opinion, or I feel, or I think that these couple of points we could put across in a different way. So that's a much better use of language than otherwise, right? You seem ill prepared for today's meeting. A better way, I think you should invest more time in researching and preparing for meetings that will help you answer questions better, right? Instead of using a slightly more harsher thing like you seem ill prepared for the meeting. And again, like I mentioned, there's no one way in which you can give feedback in all situations, right? Sometimes maybe you tried doing this a couple of times with the person, but it still doesn't work. Then maybe you need to get slightly firm both with your tone of voice and with the words that you're using, right? You need to get firm with both these things, and then maybe you use a word like this, which is you're ill prepared, so that it has more impact. That will lead to action, that will lead to the improvement in the task and behavior, right? You seem very uncooperative when your colleagues ask you for help. I would I feel, or I would appreciate if you can be more supportive to your colleagues who have just joined the organization, right? So this is a better tactful, a better way of putting it, right? Uncooperative versus saying, I'm sure you can show more, you can be more supportive towards them, right? They'll be accepted a lot better that way. Arunima, you had come on screen. Do you have any questions or comments here?
Yeah. So you mentioned being tactful, something that I've not put here, but again, it's a little tricky to kind of do this every time. But
Yeah,
something that I personally, and I think you also employ quite a bit, is using we versus again you. So
yeah,
instead of saying that, oh, you should avoid doing this, in some situations, you can
yeah,
also say that we need to start doing this in this manner. So
yeah,
you kind of, again, you don't separate yourself from the person you're giving feedback to. You're kind
yeah.
of telling them that you're on the same team and that,
Yes.
we'll do this together.
Yeah.
So sometimes using the word we also
Yeah.
helps when you're giving feedback.
Absolutely, absolutely. So I think it's a very important thing to do, especially when you're speaking one on one to somebody, and they know that if I
Correct.
say, maybe we can try doing this instead of you can
Correct.
do this, right? That saying we makes it seem like it's teamwork that's going on, and that has a very nice
Correct.
effect on this thing, right? So again, you positive use of words, we instead of you. Okay, again, give an example of negative feedback to a stakeholder. Restate it with positive words that you can possibly use, right? So work out one example here after pausing the slide. Take this to your coach. Now, do not use taunting or sarcastic comments. Sarcasm and taunts signal that you are angry at people, not their actions. Being sarcastic or taunting while giving feedback takes the attention away from the matter and makes the issue about the person. This could lead to the person taking feedback offensively, feeling targeted, and thereby becoming defensive about it, right? So an example, is coming to your office on time too much to ask you for your highness, right? So comments which are sarcastic or taunting, more often than not, when people are giving marrowing or stating stuff in sarcastic or taunting terms, they think they are very very smart and they think they're above the world, and it's the stupidest thing that you can do, because actually you're creating more animosity between you and the person that you're giving feedback to, and it's not really helping the cause at all in most cases, right? And this is how you end up creating enemies where not required. And if you think it helps, like I said, there's no one rule that applies to all 7 billion people on the planet. So there could be a few characters where sarcastic comments work in improving the behavior or task, but they're a minority, and you don't want to deploy that as a strategy as far as possible, right? So avoid doing that. Give an example of feedback to a stakeholder in a sarcastic manner. Restate it so it does not come off as a taunt or attack. And especially look at whether, in a way, introspect whether this is something that you have done in the past, right? As a behavior, kind of do a little bit of reflection here on whether you've done it in the past. And if you have, I think now is a good enough time to change it both in your personal and professional life, right? It will really help you. Okay, now present feedback as suggestions. Make, again, statement one, make these five changes in the database. There are 5 errors that I've noticed in the database which can mislead Ravi. I recommend that you do it in the following way, right? Again, the right use of words here. I recommend, I suggest. It's a very respectful way of speaking to anyone when you're doing it. I have observed that you don't focus intently when a customer is discussing his feedback. You need to change this. I have suggest the other way. I have observed that you don't focus intently when a customer is discussing his needs. I suggest that you listen attentively to every customer that you're dealing with. That will help you in understanding his requirements and thereby serving him better, right? So here again, I have observed, right? I have observed, I feel, I think is a much better way of starting that than you don't focus on the customer and starting like that, right? If you start like that, you don't focus on the customer and his intently, that doesn't work. Start with this, it'll have a much better impact, right? Now you have to remember that this entire section of using the right words is supremely important, because if you don't get this right, you'll never get good at having critical conversations or difficult conversations with people. The minute you're equipped with knowing how to use the right words, you'll feel far more comfortable having critical, difficult conversations, giving feedback to the other people, because you won't get as worried about offending people. You won't get as worried about spoiling the environment. You won't get as worried about being in some kind of a tussle or conflict with that person if you know how to use your words right. And that's what effective leaders do, that's what effective communicators do. And you've seen all these things, right? You've seen all these things being done with the right tone and use of words. And with a little bit of practice, with a little bit of coaching, we are completely capable of getting the right results. It's not going to happen overnight, but it can happen, right? And we must move towards that. Now give an example of feedback to a stakeholder, restate it to make it sound like a suggestion to them, right? So do exactly like this. Have a statement one and then have a suggestive feedback statement, right? And again, take this back to your coach to have a discussion on this. Okay, so this is your feedback on what we've discussed here. Give balanced feedback, make your feedback specific, keep your feedback objective, while giving it, which is address the behavior, not the person. Do not make personal attacks. Stick to facts, cite examples where you can, focus on the things that a person can change. Let feedback be timely. Share the implications of the issue or the behavior, or share the consequences of the issue or the behavior, and choose your words carefully when you're giving feedback to somebody, right? This is something that we just discussed right now. Okay, now reflection zone. Pause the video here and think about the 3 to 5 things that you are going to start doing or do differently from all the things that you've learned from this session on giving feedback. Okay, ensure your takeaways are in the form of specific and implementable action tools. I hope you have lots of takeaways from this session on feedback, right? Certainly when I learned this years back, this literally changed my life, because the minute you're capable of giving better feedback, it helps you both personally, professionally, and in your professional life, it helps you in terms of dealing with every stakeholder. And literally in school, they must teach us on how to give better feedback instead of teaching us a million other things that we don't end up using, right? So yeah, so this is the reflection zone. Now let's look at briefly, let's look at handling other critical conversations. We're not going to get into as much detail there, but yes, delivering difficult or bad news, that's the other kind of critical conversation that we end up having. And an example of that could be in Corona, it could be about letting somebody go off a job. It could be about talking to them about pay cuts. It could be about certain other developments that have happened in the company. So it could be different kind of bad news. Sometimes it could be talking to a client where you need to inform him about delays in a certain project, or it could be about informing him that a certain person at your end that the client would deal with is now changed, right? And that could be bad news for the client. So it could be 100 different bad news that you need to deliver to somebody. Right now, how do you go about doing that? Number one, prepare for the conversation. Understand how and why the decision was made, who was responsible for making it, and what other outcomes were considered. You need to be able to address these details clearly and accurately, right? Now, if any decision has been made which you need to inform the other person about, very simply, you need to give that person details about it, the details that you can reveal. And in simple words, if you ask me, you just need to tell him the why of the decision, right, that you're communicating to him. And telling him the why about that decision is extremely important, that we sometimes miss out on, right? And sometimes we miss out on it because we say, oh, what does he have to do with the why? Well, it's not none of his business. Do I really need to get into those many details? Yes. If you're going to be delivering some bad news to somebody, ensure that you prepare for the conversation and especially focus on the why part of it, right? And that will really help you. Now, point number two, alert the person about the nature of the conversation. This is something which is very important. By starting the conversation with caveats like, there's no easy way to say this, you can signal that the discussion might not be a pleasant one. After the caveat, deliver the bad news simply and in a straightforward way, right? So very often before you deliver a bad news, it's important for you to, in a way, mentally prepare that person, even if it's kind of just two lines before you actually start delivering the news, right? That helps so much for you to mentally prepare the person that there is some bad news that you want to discuss, and then you talk about it, right? This, there's another kind of slight psychological advantage to this. When you tell a person that, you know what, there's something unpleasant or something, some bad news or something bad that I want to discuss with you, often the person ends up thinking of the worst possible thing, right, that could have happened. And then when you share your bad news, in most cases it's not going to be that worst possible thing that you're talking about, right? So now they're expecting the worst possible thing, and what you tell them is not the worst possible thing, right? So in a way, in most cases, they have a sigh of relief where they're like, it wasn't that bad. Now, if it is that worst possible thing that you have to tell them, then of course, that will help them just mentally prepare a little, but it won't help them otherwise, right? But yes, alerting them about the nature of the conversation always helps. Now, be honest, don't sugarcoat the truth, stay objective, explain exactly what happened and why, be honest and direct, right? So again, the whole key here when giving bad news is ensure that you're being authentic, genuine, honest. Don't sugarcoat. What we mean is, do not say stuff which you don't mean. Do not say stuff for the sake of saying it. Do not make commitments because you're giving bad news and you want to say something nice or good or positive. Don't just make a commitment that you can't adhere to, which will come across as a lie later in a certain situation, right? So be honest about what you're saying while giving bad news. It may feel very uncomfortable while doing that, but it helps both you and them immediately and over a long period of time, right? Now, the other point, demonstrate empathy, which means show care and understanding towards the person by saying things like, I understand how difficult this must be. Deliver the news in a place where they can retain their dignity and work through whatever emotions might surface. So, at all points of time, when you're sharing that bad news, ensure that you're sharing, demonstrating empathy towards that situation, right? In a lot of cases, you can't do anything about the situation, but you can definitely demonstrate empathy towards that situation and person, right? And that itself is the best that you can do, and you should do it. Number five, give people time to take in the news, allow them to vent as well, right? So when you're going to give bad news to somebody, account for a certain amount of time where they will have their own frustration, they'll have their own venting to do. And a lot of times when people are venting, even they know that there's nothing that you can do about it, but when they get it out of their system, they feel way better about it when they get it out of their system than when it's inside, right? So you want to give them that time for them to vent. If they don't vent in front of you, they're often going to vent in front of five other people in the company, which could be more detrimental to your departments and your organization's cause, right? When that happens, so you want them to vent for you. So account for that time when you're delivering bad news to somebody. And of course, the last one is deliver bad news in person as far as possible. Where possible, deliver it in person. If you're working remotely with people, try to do video calls with them. If that's not possible, then do it over the phone, right? But that's how you want to, in a way, deliver bad news to somebody, as far as possible in person, if not video call, right? Like I mentioned, With each one of these topics itself, we can go into great detail, but we're going to keep this thing fairly short. Right now, how to ask for what you want, that's the other kind of critical conversation. Know why it matters. So whether it's delivering bad news or you want to ask something, the why is always very important, right? And we don't tend to think through the whys as much, and we don't try to communicate the whys as much. And as usual, telling people in a pointed ways, if you have three whys, just tell him that, okay, there are three reasons why we've done this. This is one, this is two, this is three, right? So tell the why and tell them in points, make it specific. That will really help your case. Whatever it is, a promotion, a raise, more resources, you have to be clear as to why you should get it. Come up with the top three reasons your boss or client or co-worker, top three reasons why they possibly can't say no to you, right? So they need to be very strong reasons for why you want a certain thing, or why you need it. Okay, be clear, be specific, concise, and direct. The more vague you are, the more likely your request will be misinterpreted or ignored. It always works best to start with words like I'm asking for. So whatever you're asking for, be extreme. So first say why you need that thing that you're asking for, and be extremely specific and clear in what you're asking, right? What I'm asking for is, if you're talking about a certain project and you need budget approvals, be very clear in terms of what you need. I need 10 lakh rupees to ensure that this project is executed in the way it needs to be, and I would ideally like the money to come in where the 4 lakhs comes in the first month, 4 lakhs comes in the second, and 2 lakh come in the third, right? So when you're asking for something, try to make it as specific as possible, so that avoids any confusion there, right? Pick your time, make sure that the person to whom you're making your request is really listening, otherwise your efforts will be wasted. If needed, ask for an appointment to ensure that there's no interruptions, right? That's what you want to do. And also make sure that you're directing your ask to the right person, a person that can actually do something about it, or not a person that is not the decision maker there. In a lot of cases, he may not be the direct decision maker, but he could take that case along with you to the decision maker. So first you need to convince him, and then you'll go to the decision maker. So that's okay when you do that, right? Now, the fourth thing here, when you want to ask for something, prepare for objections. If something matters, it probably won't be handed over without a little hesitation, right? Because all the resources are limited. So your boss may want to give you a raise of whatever, but he is restricted by the limitation of resources as well. So he can't just give you a raise even if he wants to, right? So there will be certain objections that will are likely to come in the discussion when you ask for something. You literally need to be prepared, where you write down on your notepad or on your computer as to what are all the objections that could come up for the request that I'm making from the other side. What are all the reasons why they may say no to this thing? So come up with all those reasons and have your answers chalked out to each one of them, right? So that's another form of preparation before you ask for something. And be persistent. If your request is declined, understand why, ask for more time, find out what needs to happen in order for you to get a yes, press for specifics and get agreement, then follow up, right? So this is another thing. If you want something within an organization, if you think that it's going to happen by you asking somebody once, or just making a vague request to somebody, things never happen like that. If you want something, you need to literally ask for it repeatedly, persistently. You need to follow up on that thing until it happens. You can't say, "Arey, I told my boss, why should I tell him again?" Right? He should do it now. If you live in that world, you're living in a lala world. You'll never get anything done. The key to almost getting anything done in your work life, in your corporate life, is just following up and being persistent about it. And the same thing happens when you want to get something through, right? Follow up as many times required for you to get what you want. See, persistence is a leadership quality. If you can't do it at lower levels of management, you're not going to be able to do it at higher levels of management, right? Because nothing comes, the higher you go, nothing comes easy. And you need people that have an attitude where they'll put heaven and earth together to get somebody, which means being persistent, following up when they want something. Right now, the third kind of critical conversation that you could have is dealing with irate customers. Again, this is a whole class in itself, but I'll just give you a few points there. When you're dealing with an irritated customer, whether it's an internal customer or an external customer, the first thing that you need to do is help the customer empty the cup. Now, what does this mean? Essentially, that when your customer is irritated about something, they'll want to vent out. Okay, they'll want to vent out, they'll want to remove their frustrations. So it's your job to listen to that customer, internal or external, and let them vent out without you interrupting, right? So just listen to them. If you try to say something and they cut you short again, keep quiet, right? Let them finish saying what they have to say first. And again, don't be busy taking offense to what your customer may say to you, right? Because most people are so busy taking offense that they don't get into the second part, which is the solution mode, because they're ultra sensitive towards stuff. Of course, if your customers cross a certain line of verbally abusing you, you can always cut short or stop that conversation and move away from it, right? That is what you can do. But beyond that, when the customer is frustrated, he can't just go and shout at your company board, right? He needs to talk to somebody within that company, within that setup, and get his frustrations out. And that person happens to be you, so you need to kind of listen to that customer, unless he's abusing you or doing something of that sort, and let him remove his frustrations, let him vent. Okay. uh, at that point of time, ensure that you apologize and you show empathy towards the situation that he's in. Very often we don't understand the word sorry, and I've spoken about this, I think, in another class, where when you say sorry to somebody at a funeral, it doesn't mean that you kill the person at the funeral, right? When you say sorry, you're saying, I'm sorry for your loss, which basically means that I feel bad for your loss. So in a situation where the customer is upset with you and it's not your fault directly, you can still apologize to the customer and say, I'm sorry for the trouble that you're going through, I'm sorry for the pain that you're going through as far as this situation, although I haven't done it myself, but I'm sorry for it, and I understand the situation that you're in, right? And a quick hack, if you're dealing with an irate customer, especially over the phone, a very good hack to cool them down immediately is, the minute they're irate, just say this line where you say, sir, just 1 minute, before you continue, let me just get a notepad and pen so I can make a note of what you're saying, and you don't need to repeat yourself again. So just give me a minute, and kind of take 30 seconds, like take 15 seconds, where you're getting a pen and paper, and you say, okay, so now tell me, I'm making notes, right? And the trick here is, you've kind of broken his flow in a way. When you've broken his flow, he cools down, and it's impossible for you to shout at somebody when they're making notes about your problem, and you said, I'm making notes so that you don't need to repeat yourself, so he's okay with that as well, right? So this is a quick trick that you can deal with if you're on the phone or even in person with somebody, that helps them cool down immediately, right? As a customer. Now shift to solution mode, understand the customer's problems, ask questions, get facts, reconfirm the issue at hand, right? So that's what you want to do. uh, Offer solutions, tell them you will tell them what you will do if there are multiple issues, address each one of them, right? So the kind of basic way in which you the basic points here is, when the customer is upset with you, of course, make notes, and make notes where you address, like you say, okay, this is issue 1, this is issue 2, this is issue 3, right? So then you can take each one of them and address them individually. Now, shifting into solution mode means that your customer, more often than not, when he's upset, will talk about various other things, that, oh, this was my experience with you 2 years back as well, and that this happened, and this is your brand always does this. If it's an internal customer, will say, your department is always doing this, and 3 years back also. So he'll talk a lot of history, geography around that issue, which is not connected to the current issue, right? So getting into solution mode means, don't address those parts which are irrelevant right now with your customer is just saying to share his frustrations, right? Just stick to the issue and get into solution mode. Say then, okay, right now your issue is 1 2 3, and these are the possible solutions that I have for 1 2. Issue 3, I'm going to have to get into much more detail on, right, for me to investigate and understand what has happened before I can give you a solution on it, right? But do not get into all the other things that the customer is saying out of his frustration. Then your conversation will go on forever, and you won't get to the solution that is required. So that's what shift into solution mode means. Make a note of all the points that are there, address those points individually. Do not get into all the fringe things that the customer is talking about, right? Now try to close pleasantly, which means at the end, reconfirm whether his customer problem is solved. If you solved his problem immediately there, apologize once again. That's one of the most important things. I often tell people, especially if you're dealing with an external customer, the litmus test in terms of knowing whether you've dealt with him well is whether when at the end the customer says to you, hey, you know what, actually, I don't have a problem with you individually. It's just that this has happened and this is what got me upset. Da, 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 da. If he says that line to you at the end, that means you dealt with him very, very nicely. And the best way to pull that line out of it is to apologize once again at the end, right? So that you can say, sir, just once again, I'd like to apologize on behalf of my department, on behalf of my company, for the trouble that you've been through, I'm going to try my best to ensure that the third problem also that you have gets sorted immediately. I will call you within the next 2 days and ensure that that happens, and then please call after that, right? So that apology once again will pull it out of him saying, yeah, yeah, but it's not your fault, it's and that means that you kind of done your end really well. And of course, summarize and reassure, like I just told you. And that's broadly some of the things that you can do while dealing with an irate client or customer when you're dealing with it. Right now, general tips for critical conversations, these are just a few things. Don't avoid them. We discussed this right at the start. Difficult conversations can be more tough the longer you wait. They build up anxiety in you. Instead of worrying about speaking up, worry about the cost of not speaking up. Make feedback a common occurrence, and get into a habit of addressing issues immediately as they arise. Right, so like we discussed right at the top, avoiding these things is not going to do any benefit to you, the other side, your department, to company, all the people in the issue. Avoiding it will increase your anxiety, in a way, will increase your frustration levels sometimes, and you don't want to do that. Just get into the habit of having these difficult conversations. It's a key leadership trait. Okay, now prepare for the conversation. We've discussed this in detail already. Be clear on the purpose of the conversation. Give yourself clarity. Have a clear purpose. That is something that's going to help. We've discussed this, so I'm not getting into that much detail. Follow up to prevent a fallout. Right, some people have delayed reactions to bad news and may experience feelings of frustration, embarrassment, or resentment after leaving the conversation. Be aware of this and check up on the other person periodically to make sure they're doing okay. If there seems to be some tension, schedule time where you can meet as individuals and not as colleagues. Right, so again, this is something that you need to keep in mind, that if you had a really a long kind of feedback session where you've discussed a lot of things that weren't up to the mark, you may just want to check on the person a little later. Everything is good, all good, right? For you to do that, because that will be important. Yes, Arunima, you had come on screen.
Yes. When just the previous slide, if you could
Yes, yes.
scroll back, though we've discussed this, I just thought I'll add another thing. What sometimes helps me when, especially if I'm having a conversation with
Yeah,
someone very senior in our organization, like our COO, I usually send out the list of things I want to talk about
yeah.
in that critical conversation that I'm going to have, because I've of course
Yes,
put my thoughts down, I've structured it, I've done
yes,
my preparation, and
yeah,
I would give it over to the stakeholders so then they can also go through it at their time. So
yes,
they can come prepared with their examples, evidence if required.
yeah,
And then we can have a more a structured conversation, and our conversation where all the facts are kind of on the table.
yeah.
So that's another tip that, of course, may not be applicable all the time, but often I would just kind of share, this is what I want to talk about, so you can come
Yeah.
prepared as well.
Yeah, I think
And
that's
that's it.
actually a brilliant. Sorry, I missed out on saying that on this slide. So thanks for bringing it up. Actually, that's a brilliant suggestion, Arunima, because considering that in today's world, everybody is relatively busy and taken up with
Correct.
stuff. You may not have multiple chances to have conversations with important stakeholders, right? So
Correct.
when you're going into that conversation, it's better in most cases if you send the agenda across in a way, or send the key points across so they can give it some thought. Then I can tell you, as a leader, I really appreciate it when somebody does this with me. And often I tell them that if they message me and say, oh, you know what, I need to have a conversation with you about something, before the conversation I'll message back more often than not, saying, okay, just send me the points of what are all the things that you want to discuss, because I want to be mentally
Correct.
prepared with it as well. And that makes the conversation so much more productive than it will otherwise, right?
Absolutely.
So I'm sorry I forgot to mention that here, but this is exactly what needs to come.
And I mean, if because we are discussing high stake conversations, so
Yeah,
it's a good idea to really treat it obviously with that kind of
yeah,
respect and
yeah,
go with the kind of preparations required. So I think it's a
yeah.
very important thing that people can
Yes, yes, yeah.
do.
Thanks for bringing it up, Arunima. You're doing your job really well. of chiming in where required with your questions and your points. Right? Yeah. So follow up, preventive follow up. Okay. So we're done with the topic. Whatever, come up with your three, your at least five. This has been such a long topic, right? So many great points that you've discussed here. So come up with your five big takeaways that you had from this entire session. Of course, you know that you need to take it back to your life coaching session and have a discussion with your coach on this. Yes, Arima.
No, since we're at the end of the session, I think
Okay.
it was a very long class, but I think an
Yeah.
important one.
Yes.
So
Definitely. Yep. So thank you very much, guys. All of us know the importance of having these difficult, critical conversations, especially with important stakeholders. Get good at it, and one of the only ways you can get good at it is beyond the life coaching class. Have those conversations, try to use a lot of the things that you've learned here in conversations. We've given you a lot of different things to work with, and the reason why we've given you a lot of things, especially in feedback, to work with is because different situations, different people will demand different ways in which you give feedback, right? So we can't give you one solution that works in all cases. We need to give you a bunch of ideas, and then you need to use your own discretion while using a lot of those things, right? And that's the reason why we made it so detailed and thorough for you to get good at this subject. Okay, thank you very much. We'll see you next time. Thank you.